Do you suffer from any allergies? Not unless you count cocktail parties. Richard Powers, bewilderment. I once got the opportunity to meet and interview one of my all-time heroes, Mikhail Gorbachev. But first, I had to survive a party. Do you ever feel anxious about parties, and why? What strategies do you use to survive parties? And what's the best or worst experience you ever had at a party? In this week's episode, we're going to explore something a little fun. Why parties usually suck, and how to survive them in order to become a little lighter, like a bird. Welcome to the Like a Bird podcast. I'm James Chadwick, and throughout 2024, I'll be sharing one essay a week or perhaps an interview, and then I'll be rolling all these ideas up into my second book just in time for Christmas. But why Like a Bird? Well, it all started, as it often seems to do, with a single line that I couldn't get out of my head by the French writer Paul Valéry. One should be light like a bird and not like a feather. That line felt true and important. Yes, we should all want to grow lighter and freer as we grow older, but lighter with control, like a bird in flight and not like a feather buffeted around by the wind. And so this weekly podcast and newsletter are for everyone ready to grow lighter by gently cutting themselves free from the ideas, the habits, and the people that are weighing them down. Got any of those? My guess is yes. So let's dive in to this week's idea, which is also available at jechadwick.com. Today, I'd like to share this week's essay, an interview with Gorbachev and why I hate parties, why parties usually suck, and how to survive them. I once got the opportunity to meet and interview one of my all-time heroes, Mikhail Gorbachev. It was around 1993, a few years after he'd received the Nobel Peace Prize, and I was still an undergraduate at Oxford, trying to prove myself as a journalist on the student paper. One evening, the press release came through on the fax machine. Gorbachev was coming to speak in Oxford next week, and I knew this was my big chance for a serious interview. I'd just recently worked out that getting interviews in Oxford was easier than I'd imagined. I was already pestering every poor A to C-list celebrity who was unfortunate enough to visit the city. I just called their PR team and asked to meet them, and they inexplicably said yes and proposed a time to meet in the Randolph lobby. In fact, I was on a bit of a roll. A chubby George Best dressed in an improbably pink shell suit, a very witty and kind Eddie Izzard, the dub poet Benjamin Zephaniah, over tea and biscuits served by his mum at his home in East Ham, and even Bob Hawke, the former Australian Prime Minister and Rhodes Scholar, famously held the world record in the 1950s for drinking a yard of ale 11 seconds. Gorbachev, I felt, would cement my reputation as a serious interviewer. I just needed to call up the number on the fact sheet in my hand before anyone else got the same idea and ask politely. Gorby would be all mine. As I called the number, I didn't recognize the name or the organization on the fax. Rabbi Shmuley Botiach of the Oxford University L'chaim Society. This was still 5 years before Google was founded, so I was not aware that Botiach, named subsequently by the Washington Post as the most famous rabbi in America, had been sent and funded as an emissary to Oxford to raise the profile of the Chabad Jewish community, and had founded the L'chaim Society in 1989. I didn't know any of this, and in those days, if you didn't know something, you just dialed and blagged it. Hi, is this Rabbi Shmuley Botiach? This is James Chadwick from the Oxford Student. I understand the L'chaim Society is bringing Gorbachev to speak next week. I'd love to interview him. Long silence. Hello? Another long silence. Then, tell me, Mr. Chadwick, why should we let you interview one of the greatest political figures of the 20th century? What are your motivations for this interview? What relevant experience or geopolitical insight do you bring that qualifies you for this honour? I explained hesitantly about Eddie Izzard and George Best, wisely omitting the part about the pink shell suit. Mr. Chadwick, I do not know these people. Do you even know what the L'chaim Society is and what we stand for? Do you know what's happening in Israel? Have you done any research into us, Mr. Chadwick? Another long silence, this time mine. Look, why don't you come over and we'll discuss this further. Come to my house this evening. We're having a little party. It's very informal. You can meet some of our student community and we can see where it goes. See you at 7. The call ended and my bowels churned a little. Fuck. This was a big problem. I desperately wanted to meet Gorby, and my future career might depend on it, but there was now a monstrous obstacle I would need to tackle first. My deepest, darkest nemesis. A party. I've always hated parties. I think I'm generally a sociable and chatty person in regular life, but for whatever reason, parties freak me out. All my physical and mental faculties turn to undependable blancmange between the moment I step into a party and stumble out. Usually, I RSVP yes, and then never got off my own sofa, and I'm a no-show. Still, on the disastrous occasions that I do turn up, I typically seek out the dullest and most isolated person in the room and then monopolise them until they find an excuse to leave early. I'm like a colon cleanse for party hosts. But this was for Gorby. Tonight, I needed to step up and bring my A game. So a few hours later, I was cycling through the cold, dark rain towards the rabbi's house, dangerously hungry and thirsty for Dutch courage. I chained my bike in the rain and knocked on the door, and it was opened by a towering, elegant American girl in a black cocktail dress and pearls. Presumably they were her informal pearls. "Come in. You're a little late. We're just getting started," she said. My only waterproof jacket was a giant Russian army surplus coat, which she reluctantly took and hung on a tiny hanger before leading me into the living room. Things had started badly and then got precipitously worse. When it comes to parties, for me, size does matter. As Jordan said in The Great Gatsby, I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. I stepped into a living room with a dozen preppy and intense kids trained in the dark arts of professional mingling, and there was nowhere to hide for the next hour. It felt like being locked in the green room before the National Debate Club or Spelling Bee televised finals. One by one, they rotated in to start a conversation with me, quickly established my profound ignorance of Middle Eastern politics and most things, and then rotated out effortlessly. They just kept coming. I was like a new lamppost that every dog in the park had to piss on just a little. Fortunately, there was alcohol, and someone kindly filled our wine glasses. Or at least someone kept filling up my glass. The first rule of being a British student is never to refuse free alcohol, but these American kids clearly hadn't got the memo. More fool them. After an hour as a lamppost, we all moved into the dining room for a sit-down Shabbat dinner, and I was seated opposite the rabbi. Now, the second rule of being a British student is to consume as much free food as possible when presented with the opportunity, and I took this rule very seriously. I surveyed the feast of generous portions and set about gorging myself efficiently and comprehensively. Conveniently, I'd also been seated in front of the only alcohol on the table, a full bottle of cheap vodka. So I naturally began to apply the first rule once more. Winter was coming, and I needed to store more calories. I decided to focus on the food and drinks task first, and then move on to buttering up the rabbi. This party was all right. I was doing well. I was even, dare I admit it, enjoying myself. And then the speeches started. Now, I wasn't expecting this. The rabbi said a few words about the significance of Shabbat, and possibly spoke some Hebrew, and then nominated one of the preppiest kids to say a few words. Then this kid just stood up, thanked Rabbi Botiak, launched into one of the most beautiful, sincere, witty, profound meditations on the meaning of love, raised a glass to pronounce a loud L'chaim toast, and then sat down. What just happened? How did he just do that off the cuff, I wondered, as I gave myself an extra little L'chaim with the cheap vodka. Can all American kids do this? Very impressive. Next, he called up the statuesque girl in the pearls. Okay, we're doing this again. She was even better. She totally nailed her meandering meditation on peace. Incredible. L'chaim. Then again and again, moving around the table, all these kids totally killed their speeches. I still remember they had this great technique where they started with a sweet and touching observation. You know, Rabbi, the other day I was walking to my lecture and I noticed 2 butterflies dancing in the rosebush, as colourful and as happy as I've ever seen. And then they'd somehow connect it all up to peace in the Middle East, and we'd all shout, L'chaim! God, this was fun. James, why don't you share some words? That's funny, I thought. One of them's also called James. This should be a good one. I looked around. Why was everyone looking at me? Why was the rabbi smiling at me? Oh, God. Looking back now, 30 years later, I still can't believe I hadn't worked out that my turn was coming. I mean, I knew I was being checked out for the Gorbachev interview, almost everyone else had spoken. I ate my share of their food and drink at their table. Okay, I'd drunk considerably more than my share of the wine and the vodka, and I suspect that did play a factor in what happened next. I remember rising to my feet and looking everyone earnestly in the eyes, long before I had worked out what to say. In fact, I'm not sure I ever consciously worked out what I was planning to say. Unlike the American kids, I had no experience of talking in public. I'd never been invited randomly to stand up and start riffing on butterflies and my dreams for a better world. At school in England, we essentially sat alphabetically and wrote essays for about 12 years, between rolling about in the mud, singing hymns and exploding test tubes. At no point were we encouraged to speak, let alone stand up and string them together into sentences. All I could think of was what my dad had once told me about public speaking. Start with a good joke, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, sit down. And so that's what I did. Thank you, Rabbi Botiak. Friends, I'm going to tell you a joke. How do we know that Jesus Christ was Jewish? Anybody? Nobody? Because he lived at home till he was 30. His mum thought he was the son of God, and he thought his mum was a virgin. That is the joke I have told you. Thank you. I sat down uneasily. Now, in the movies, this is the part where there's a long silence and then suddenly everyone breaks out into uproarious laughter. Or the rabbi starts with a giggle, then a chuckle, then it kind of ripples out from there, ending in uproarious laughter. And perhaps they would all start chanting, Gorby, Gorby, Gorby. But that didn't happen. Only the long silence bit happened. I don't recall much after that. After the speech was finished, I tried to catch the rabbi's eye, but he didn't seem in a buttering mood. I like to think I thanked everyone and made a polite excuse to leave, but it's equally likely that I grabbed the vodka and my Russian trench coat and cycled off into the wobbly darkness, my face burning red from the shame and alcohol. I may also have been hit by a large wet bush travelling in the other direction, judging by the condition of my wheel spokes the following day. Despite my hangover, I woke up early and called to follow up. An assistant regretfully informed me that Gorbachev would only have time for Tier 1 interviews. I crawled back into bed to wallow in vodka-soaked shame and self-pity. No Gorby, no career, no future. All hopes were dashed by my old nemesis, parties. I eventually got over the hangover, but I never interviewed Gorbachev. Shmuley Botiak grew the L'Chaim Society into a vibrant and controversial debating and public speaking club with over 5,000 non-Jewish members until it closed in 2001. He became close friends with Michael Jackson, and excerpts from his bestseller Kosher Sex were serialized in Playboy. He's written over 30 books and is still on TV in America, a lot. Decades later, I still mistrust parties. I can see how they once served a purpose before dating apps and Netflix, but now I feel it's often something we still do without knowing why we still do it. But at least I don't fear them anymore. Admittedly, I rarely get invites these days, but if I did, I would feel better prepared to survive them for a few reasons. First, I genuinely don't care what anyone thinks of me anymore, which helps. I'm not selling myself or my services anymore, and I'm not searching for my perfect life partner, so it's very easy to meet and quickly connect with others. Second, I've discovered that almost everyone else hates parties as much as I do, so I have no excuse to feel different or special. The world seems to be broadly made up of two types of people: introverts who just hate parties outright, and then extroverts who appear to thrive off other people's energy, especially when networking at parties, but then love to tell you that even though they regularly dance on bar tops wearing feather boas, deep down they are introverts. They would prefer to be home, curled up on the sofa in their pyjamas. In short, I'm not alone. Finally, over the years, I've diligently collected all kinds of eclectic and entertaining advice about how to make the most of parties. I'll probably never use most of them myself, but I feel better knowing about them, and I offer them up here for you to experiment with at your next party. Enjoy. Find someone you don't know very well, start a conversation with them, and then deliberately lean in close and whisper, "I just want you to know that I personally don't have a problem with you being here." Number 2, instead of bringing the best looking but most affordable wine you think you can get away with, just bring ice to house parties. There's never enough. Number 3, if someone starts telling you a story you've heard before, you have 2 options. Option 1, you must immediately interrupt with an over-the-top reaction and cut it off at the pass with, "Oh, yes, that was totally," insert adjective, "I couldn't believe it when you told me." Option 2, if you don't act immediately, you must hear it fully and react throughout all over again as expected by the teller. Number 4, never congratulate a pregnant woman unless you can literally see the baby's head emerging. Not worth the risk. Number 5, if someone asks you, "So where are you from?" Or much worse, "Where are you really from?" don't waste your time getting angry about it. Just say to them, "You go first," and keep probing until it's clearly established that we're all really from somewhere else. Number 6, if you are wittier than you are handsome, avoid loud parties. Number 7, overall, don't be too snobbish about hating small talk. Big people can enjoy small talk together. Small talk exists for a reason. It helps us first establish what type of person we're dealing with and what kinds of subjects we might want to avoid. As Arthur Schopenhauer observed, we should always remember when meeting new people that they might only be a few steps away from wanting to grab a weapon and end their own lives. Small talk allows us to feel our way into the real conversation we might both enjoy having. Also, as Alain de Botton has noted, hatred of small talk overlooks that it isn't ever the subject matter per se that determines the profundity of a conversation. There are ways of talking about death that are trivial and ways of addressing the weather that feel significant. Number 8. Finally, as Rachel Sugar sharply reminds us, we should never tell strangers at parties who we think they look like. In the vast majority of circumstances, it is unacceptable to issue a verdict on the totality of someone else's appearance. You cannot walk up to a stranger at a party and declare, "Wow, great waist-to-hip ratio, but you sure do have a noticeably large forehead." Yet that is exactly what "you know who you look like" is accepting code. And number 9, instead of asking people what they do or where they're from, ask them if they're happy. If they're dull, they'll quickly excuse themselves. Thank you for listening to Like a Bird. Please subscribe to get one new idea a week. Check out more creative projects at jechadwick.com and share with anyone you think might be trying to grow lighter. And have a great light week.